I'm supposed to talk about some shortcomings, and when you start talking about shortcomings, then people get a little sad. You see, so don't be sad. I just want to point out the shortcomings that as I see them in American policy toward China recently, and there are lots of problems in U.S.-China relations. And we all know this, and Harry Harding wrote a wonderful article at the end of last year talking about the China debate in the United States among specialists, and how there's so many problems, and how the specialists tend to be pessimistic. The things haven't worked out the way they thought. And the upshot of this is because of many problems. And so I can't cover them all. And I just want to cover one, actually. I'm going to focus on one, because it's the most important one right now. It's the South China Sea issue. And I'll dwell on that a little bit. But first, a little background, and then I'll talk about the problem, and look at the consequences of it, and then look out into the future. We're supposed to look to the next administration, so I want to give some idea about that. That's more of a guess, in a way, but I want to share that with you. The problems have become more salient in U.S.-China relations. The Chinese would say it's the American side that started this, so be aware of that. But from my perspective, it really is Xi Jinping. And he's just bolder. He's willing to have more tension in the relationship, and he's pushy on various issues. And so he's pushy on the East China Sea and the South China Sea. He's setting up economic institutions that compete with the United States. That's fine, but they exclude the United States and do other things that are undercutting the president's efforts, Mr. Obama's efforts in the Asia-Pacific region. The arms buildup won't quit. It's an amazing thing to watch the Chinese build up, and it's aimed at Americans. And that's it's been clear for a long time, but it's just keeps on. The cyber theft is a big issue. Which we've all heard a lot about. Economic practices in China are a big issue, and repression inside China. All of these are serious issues for the United States as they deal with China. I've watched Mr. Obama very carefully, tried to watch him, and I find that for 6 years he's been amazingly reticent about China. He doesn't say negative things about China in the first 6 years of his term. He might say something negative about China maybe 5 times a year. That's how, if you go back and look at those years. But since 2014, he's been saying negative things about China. From 2014 to 2015, through that period, he was saying negative things about China on all these kinds of issues, often, very frequently. And so I said, what happened to this guy? Why is he doing this? And to me, I think he's reflecting, in his mind, more serious concerns. He's toughening, in a way, toward China. And so we've seen and he's taken some actions which have shown a toughening approach toward China as well. So there was a very big push on the cyber theft issue prior to the summit of September of last year. And there was Susan Rice came to GW, gave a big talk, and said cyber is going to be the big issue. And she was right. It was the big issue in that meeting. And of course, the South China Sea has become tougher, too. And here you find that the Pentagon has now been seemingly allowed to move forward with a whole series of efforts to deal with the expansion of China in the South China Sea. This is area, of course, you're all familiar with this, is area that China claims, but others claim it too. And the Chinese are using coercive means and other means to have their way, to gain control over these pieces of territory in the South China Sea. So what's happening here? Well, the Chinese are succeeding.
Take questions right after his talk.
The Chinese are succeeding. They are expanding in the South China Sea. They are occupying these places. And the U.S. has been complaining loudly, and it's been sailing ships around and so forth, but it can't get them to stop. It doesn't work. And this is a problem. And so how serious a problem is it? If you can't get the Chinese to stop, then what happens? Well, there are good things that come from this from the United States. If you think of this along this lines, is that the neighbors of China become very alarmed about this kind of behavior on the part of the Chinese. And so they have a tendency to line up to seek the United States to help them in various ways. And so relations between the United States and a variety of countries have become much closer than they probably would have been had the Chinese not been so assertive in the South China Sea. So that's a plus for the United States, perhaps, if you're looking at influence. That's a plus. But there are minuses, and I'm concerned about the minuses. And the minuses, I think, is basically the U.S. has a position in the region that rests heavily in the minds of the government that the U.S. is a security guarantor, that it can take care of security in the region, keep it stable, this type of thing. And in the face of China and Xi Jinping's approach, it can't. It doesn't. So what are the consequences of that? Well, who cares, right? Just a bunch of islands, the tiny little things. That's a common reaction. I care. This is important to me. And I care because I think the order of Asia is something that's involved here. Now, what is this? Well, these are challenges to the existing order in Asia. And they're being changed by coercive, intimidating means. This is not a good thing. Not a good thing for Asian order. It's not a good thing for the United States. And we can't seem to stop it. And so, and it leads to the situation we're in today, which has, I think, two serious problems. The first problem is that it's mainly the responsibility of DOD in this administration, the Department of Defense, to deal with this issue. Well, the Defense Department is very good. They're very competent people, but they have a limited toolkit. And their toolkit has to do with military things. And we've reached a point now where we're getting close to, we're having armed surveillance, armed flights over Scarborough Shoal, an area that the Chinese occupy, and the U.S. is sending armed planes over it. So this is so maybe the Chinese will react, and maybe we'll have some shooting. This is not a good thing. It can be somewhat dangerous. I don't want to exaggerate it. I don't think it's that dangerous, but it's emblematic of how the Obama government is going about this problem. It's DODs to deal with. They're dealing with this. And it gets me to my second point. And this is, I think, is a shortcoming on the part of the administration. And this is Mr. Obama himself. He's very deliberative. He's very iterative. He doesn't do dramatic decisions. It's all step by step. He's very predictable. And he makes sure the other sides know what he's going to do, more or less. He very much avoids spilling over from one area of the relationship to another. If he's have a problem in one area of the relationship, it stays in that boundary. It's like there are little channels. It's not allowed to spill over into other issues. And so there's no linkage. There's no linkage with other things. And so the upshot, and he doesn't allow these differences to get in the way of progress in the relationship. And so we had, all this was on display in the March 31 summit meeting. Look at the optics of that meeting. Positive, wonderful relationships, everything's good. Look at the optics. Big progress on climate change, on nuclear security, da-da-da-da. And you ask the administration official and say, well, the president really, in private, really gave it to him on the South China Sea. Well, maybe he did, but that didn't reflect itself in the progress in the relationship. It didn't spill over, if you see what I mean. For an opponent, what does this mean? It means that the U.S. is easy to read. That the danger of your probing, what critics on Congress call the salami slicing of the Chinese in the South China Sea, the danger of this is low. What's he going to do? Well, he's going to do something iterative. Okay? We can tolerate that. We can do that. We can keep on going. And so the cost of a probe, of continued probing, is low. There's not much danger of significant blowback, and it's not going to have any effect on the progress in other parts of the relationship or spill over into other areas in the relationship. Is this a good thing? To me, this is a shortcoming. I don't think this is a good thing. But I think it's a reality. And so looking out, what I see in the future, I see Mr. Obama is unlikely to change this. This has been his mode of operation for a long time. I think there are probably good reasons why he feels this way, but I think the costs to the United States are significant, and I may have time to talk about that in the question period. But for a future president, we'll obviously have to calculate how important is U.S. credibility in Asia Pacific, and is this credibility and stature in the Asia Pacific influential on U.S. relations with China? How important is all of that? Now, this comes in the context of many other problems. So how much weight do you put on this particular problem? My sense is Mr. Obama doesn't put too much weight on this issue. If he did, he probably would give it a bit higher priority. And then the second thing you have to calculate is what are the other countries in the Asia Pacific going to do if you, America, take some stronger actions vis-a-vis China? Are they going to be with you? Or are they going to hedge and worry about this? How much tension in U.S.-China relations will they tolerate? And the third thing that you need to calculate is how much risk is involved if you take other actions vis-a-vis Xi Jinping. Let it spill over a bit. Be a little less predictable in your approach. What's the risk you face with Xi Jinping's China? So all of those things have to be taken into account before a future president will decide on this issue. Now, I'm in the midst of a study looking at the U.S. election debates on Asia. So it's really very interesting. So I'm getting to know the candidates. And when I look at the candidates, so when I'm looking at, I'm going to look at, well, who's likely to be in power? And who likely of any of the candidates would take a policy different than President Obama's harder policy, but not terribly effective policy on this particular issue. And I think Senator Rubio would have done it. But he's history. He's not going to be, he probably would have done it. He had a pretty coherent view of what he wanted to do, and this is what he said. And then we have Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton says, I will go toe-to-toe with the Chinese on their differences. And she says this again and again. They're gaming the system all the time. And I'm going to stop them from gaming the system. If you want quotes, I can just provide a gazillion of these quotes if you want them. But she's looking at Xi Jinping and China as gaming. This is small potatoes. These are probes, salami slices. This isn't war. This isn't fundamental. And so is she going to be willing to change this mode of operation very much for the sake of these issues? I wonder. And then you look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump has very effective rhetoric. And he says, very broad things about China, particularly on trade issues. But basically, he's not very hostile on China. On the trade issue, he says it's not China's fault that this is happening. It's America's fault. It's our stupid leadership, he uses the word stupid. Our stupid leadership that is causing these kinds of problems. And so I don't think Trump is going to be the type of leader that would be concerned about these kinds of issues. So this makes me think that the future leaders probably won't do much about this. And so the salami slicing will continue. China will continue to advance. The U.S. won't be able to stop them. And the public probably won't care very much because the public doesn't see China much as a security concern or even as an economic concern anymore. I mean, the security concern, recent polls show the security concern about China's military is below climate change. They think climate change is more of a danger than China. And so it's about, it's low. And so under this kind of, and the candidates too. If you add all up the debate, all the noise, the concern about China really isn't very high. It's not urgent at all, as far as I can see. So the bottom line here, if I had to guess now, and we have to look out, we're supposed to look out in this panel, so I'm going to just look out in that context. I don't like making predictions, but this is the best I can do under the circumstances. This big problem in U.S.-China relations will continue. Xi Jinping will continue to expand. The U.S. will not be able to stop him. There'll be a lot of noise, but it will continue. I'm sorry for this myself. I think that this is not good for the United States, but it can be nothing immediately bad is going to happen as this slicing continues.